Hello, this is another Doctor Who review, and again we're still in the run-up to Halloween, so I'm aiming to review 3 sort of horror, gothic-y type episodes of Doctor Who, and then put them all 3 up on my blog at the same time. So I've already done one episode, and the next adventure I want to review is this one, The Image of the Fendahl, and there we go with the full Dennis Wheatley style cover, and there you can see Tom Baker. So this is a 4th Doctor adventure with Tom Baker and Leela, who, if you are one of the, if you're unfamiliar with Leela, I'd be surprised if you're even watching this. On the off chance you are, she was meant to be of human descent, but a human colony on an alien planet, so that kind of begs weird questions. If you're a human and you move to a different planet, and 10 generations later, are you still human, or have you turned into something you should be called something else resident on that planet? Which is kind of shading into science fiction identity politics there, and maybe I should steer clear of that one. Now I do suspect, particularly if this ever becomes a reality and humans do start colonising other planets, they're going to have to be similar enough to Earth that we can survive there, obviously. But you're always going to have differences with other planets, slightly different gravity, slightly different atmospheres, slightly different, different plant life, different animal life, that sort of thing. Even if we introduce life from Earth, plants and animals from Earth, nonetheless they're going to evolve and adapt to different conditions. And the humans, the colonists, will evolve. So probably after 10, 20 generations, they will have evolved to a point where they will develop features no longer common to the humans on Earth. And so will they become different species? I don't know. That's a meander. I'm totally off the point of this review. But anyway, this particular episode, Image of the Fendahl, is from 1977, which is the year my brother was born, actually. Totally unrelated to those two facts. The story, the plot line, just to briefly summarise, it's very kind of Dennis Wheatley, which is why I'm doing it for a Halloween wrap-up review. Archaeologists have dug up a skull on an archaeological site in Kenya. The skull has been brought back for further study and research and what have you to Britain, and a research centre that's set up and owned by a multi-millionaire called Fendahl. He owns this research centre, which is actually an old building that's been converted for the purpose, in a village called Fetchborough, which, as the Doctor himself points out quite early on in the episode, fetch is an old word, an old English word. In the episode he talks about it being the word for a ghost, which to a point it is, but the fetch goes back to Anglo-Saxon times and is a word inherited from there. And a fetch is a double. It's kind of like the idea of an astral body, a version of yourself that can be seen by other people in places where you are not. So it's like your dream self, your spirit self that goes off wandering, and sometimes you might catch a glimpse of somebody else's fetch, either because they're in dire straits themselves, and you kind of see that an echo of their soul as either they're dying and they're there saying farewell to you, or as a cry for help for you to rush to their aid. Or they might, if they are a practitioner of magical arts, be sending the fetch, sending out this spirit self to go and work either good or evil, depending on their moral temperament, in the world. So it's this kind of, it is a ghost sort of-ish, but not in the sense of necessarily always a dead person. It can be the presence of a living person as well as occasionally the presence of a dead person. But I would guess that whoever wrote the script, whose name temporarily escapes me, was perhaps unfamiliar with that at the time. So a bit more background detail there about the fetch. So this spooky village, and the Doctor's point of when he's talking about ghosts is that why is this village named after ghosts? Well, there's something there, something in this village which is strange and mysterious, and we're flashing back to the first episode I recorded for this set of 3, The Daemons, in which the village is called Devil's End. And why is it called Devil's End? And it's this sort of mystical topography that the names of places, the toponyms, the names of villages and towns and cities and whatnot, are not random. They are chosen for reasons. And this is something which crops up a lot in folkloric studies and people with an interest in esotericism and magic and folklore and this kind of thing. That places derive their names from not just kind of random, oh, let's call it this, but from deeper roots. Sometimes it's the name of the person who founded it. So there is the argument that Ipswich comes from Chipperswick. A wick is a bend in the river, and Chippers is a name. So possibly there was some bloke, possibly a woman, more likely bloke, called Chippers in the past who founded a community on the bend in the river. And then when people said, oh, what do we call this place? They said, oh, let's call this Chippers Wick. Ipswich eventually becomes pronounced Ipswich 7 centuries down the line. Maybe so, maybe true. There are other places which may derive their names from ancient gods. Perhaps there's a temple to that god there once. In this case, maybe Fetchborough derives its name from the fact that there are a lot of strange, spooky phenomena going on there. Why are there lots of strange, spooky phenomena going on there? Because there is a rift in time at this place. A little bit like Cardiff, which obviously has a really strange and spooky name. Not. Which in later revived New Who becomes the centre of an awful lot of strange magical activity, because there's this big kind of rift in time centred on Cardiff itself, which is why Torchwood ends up based there and all sorts of other things going on. So maybe they should have gone for a city with a more spectral name than Cardiff, but there was clearly more practical reasons behind the choice of Cardiff than the issue of the root origins of its name. Anyway, back to the plot. So having dug up this skull, they're conducting experiments on it because they realise there is something deeply weird about this skull. It's way older than any human-looking skull should be, for one thing, and it seems to radiate all sorts of strange powers and phenomena. And part of the experimentations that they're carrying out using various high-tech machines awakens this skull, if we can put it like that. It kind of triggers a life process where it starts to drain the life energy of the people around it in order to restore itself. There's a particularly effective scene in which a hiker is going through the woods and he can hear something creeping about in the woods behind him, so sort of looking over his shoulder and walking faster and faster, and then eventually panics and breaks into a run, and the monster, which is never quite seen, but the monster in the woods catches up with him and kills him. And his rather manky, nearly disintegrated body is then found the following day by the people who work in the research centre. And there are others. It almost drains the life of the doctor himself, and it attacks the rest of other people. It's feeding itself. And I wonder if the scriptwriter took inspiration from a 1965 film with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee called The Skull. In that one, the skull is the skull of the Marquis de Sade, or the Marquis de Sade, if you prefer, I should say. Given that his nationality, it should be Marquis rather than Marquis. It's a haunted skull. It possesses the evil believed to stem from de Sade himself, who was probably nowhere near as evil as he liked to pretend to be, but the film kind of runs with the public image he liked to create for himself. I suspect the truth of the matter is that he was full of piss and wind and didn't do half the things he claimed to do, but that's a separate issue. And that preceded this film by 12 years. So, this Doctor Who episode by 12 years. So it's perfectly possible that the scriptwriters had seen the skull and thought, oh, that would be a good idea to work in somewhere. And then when they were sitting down, banging away at their typewriter, they recalled that story of the sort of the evil warped skull. And again, much like the Daemons, there is also this influence of Quatermass and the Pit, of sinister alien influences buried deep within the ground who start to manifest what look like, at first, occult spectral phenomena, but are down to alien technology. So, the skull starts to reanimate, it starts to feed off the living. And the Doctor gets involved and realises that there is something way more to this than meets the eye. Meanwhile, we've got two rival camps going on. The first camp, the least interesting of the camps, is the coven of devil worshippers who are being led by one of these scientists in a move that I'm sure would cause apoplexy for Richard Dawkins' scientists in the occult, surely not. Leading various local Herberts, most of whom you know, just figures in hoods, you don't really know who they are most of the time. But they are cavorting in the cellars of the building where the research centre is based. And they believe that the skull is a demonic skull. And that all their rituals and ceremonies will contact the demon and kind of bring them great worldly power and all the rest of it. And they're not entirely wrong. It is this very malign, malevolent force. It's a deeply odious alien. And we only find out the ins and outs of it from the Doctor in due course. Where he tells us that the creature, the alien, the Fendahl, is a thing of Time Lord nightmares and fairy stories. Kind of a boogeyman thing that Time Lords tell their children to shut them up. And in this respect, we flash forward to the modern, revived New Who series, where you've got things like the Toclafane, those horrible heads that float around in metal balls, which aren't really the Toclafane at all, but they're called that because the Master decided to name these mutated humans, which is what they really are, after a figure of nightmare from Time Lord fairy stories and boogeyman stories. So the Toclafane are, again, folklore from Gallifrey, a bit like the Fendahl is folklore from Gallifrey, except it's not only folklore, it's a memory of a creature that really did exist, which the Time Lords did everything in their power to wipe out from existence because it was so phenomenally dangerous. So that the story we are then told is that an ancient race, umpty 100 millions of years ago, developed the Fendahl as an organic weapon. So they genetically engineered this living creature that they could unleash upon their enemies, whoever they were, and feed off them and eat them and kill them all and slaughter them. It would be this sort of ultimate weapon. And it did exactly that. It ate all of their enemies, and then it went and ate the people who had created it. So it consumed life. And the Doctor says that the Fendahl is death. It feeds off life constantly until there is no life left. And eventually, having created a bunch of these Fendahls, when there was nothing else to eat, they started eating each other, which must have been quite a grim spectacle, until there was only one left on the planet. And that somehow was launched into space, it's never quite clear how, as a skull. So all that was left of the Fendahl, the last of the Fendahl, was this skull, and it whizzed through space and eventually landed on Earth in Kenya, and there got unearthed by Fendelman. And of course, Fendelman and Fendahl, it's revealed that the aliens have been genetically altering humanity and twisting humanity and getting up to no good to one day reach the point where this very unearthing of the skull and the technology needed to reanimate it would all be in existence. And that's a very, very common theme in Doctor Who, because you've got no end of aliens buried on Earth, all of these ancient evil forces who are manipulating and engineering and steering the course of human history to serve their own ends. It kind of begs the question, why do they never land on other planets and steer the course of Draconian history, or Dalek history, or Mondasian history or something? Why is it always Earth? And do all of these buried ancient manipulative aliens know about each other? Are they aware that there's a multitude of these intergalactic chess players all manipulating humanity to different ends? Or is it just a plot device that's had the arse kicked out of it by constant repetition? Who can say? But Fendahl Fendelman realises his entire family since the year dot have been engineered to basically be servants of the Fendahl to reach this very moment in time when all of his scientific cleverness and his wealth, because he's a multi-millionaire, all of this are there not for his advantage or his family or humanity, but solely to serve the goal of this buried alien monstrosity who wants to be awakened in order to begin again the process of eating all life on a brand new planet. We're then, as the plot goes on, revealed that the Time Lords, having thought that there was only this one Fendahl left, had put a lock a stasis lock around the planet so that no one could ever land on the planet, nothing could get off the planet, the creature would be kind of obliterated from reality and history, with no escape. Why they didn't just blow the planet up, I don't know, but that's the option they went for. They locked this seemingly dead thing on a dead planet, unaware that the skull had launched into space. And it's something that the Time Lords are quite ashamed of, because apparently they shouldn't have done that. So their policy of non-interference went out the window on that one. So once again, a bit like with Sutek, this ancient evil force manipulating people, we're told that if the Fendahl gets its own way, it liberates itself, it'll just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat until there is nothing whatsoever left on Earth at all. Not so much as a fly, it will have eaten every living thing on the planet, because it is death. So there's this huge risk. So the satanic cult are on a bit of a loser, and they too, we realise, are being manipulated, because the Fendahl, they do succeed in resurrecting it with this ritual they perform. But what really happens is that, having been resurrected, the Fendahl then eats them all and makes them part of itself. And so you get the little mini Fendaline coming about, which is like the embryonic form of a Fendahl. And the only female scientist in the team, Thea Ransom, that's the name of the character, not the actress, she becomes possessed by the central force, by the skull itself, and she turns into this sort of, looks a bit like a Medusa kind of figure, painted gold with these rather unconvincing huge eyes painted onto her, and a very curly blonde hair pulling everywhere. Kind of looks like snakes on the Medusa's head, and these really quite unpleasant Fendaline, which when I saw this as a child gave me nightmares. The Fendaline were really quite sinister, and when they first appear on the show, these sort of huge sluggy snake things with slimy tendrils coming out of their mouths. For myself as a child back then in '77, they looked as creepy as hell. They really were nightmarish. And the prospect of them slithering down darkened corridors or through darkened forests, slurping the life out of people, was just deeply unpleasant. Which is why the episode works so well, I think. Now, set against these Satanists, there is the rival camp of the good witches, or at least a singular good witch, Ma Tyler, played by an actress called Daphne Hurd, who was a remarkably good actress, appeared in loads and loads and loads of different shows, playing various eccentric, potty old women, and back to much younger characters when she herself was younger, obviously. But gone is the Shakespearean delivery and a monologue that she exhibits in other shows she's in. And she puts in a real country accent, and she is the mad old granny, Ma Tyler, the White Witch of Fetchborough. And very much in keeping with the sort of woman who probably would have been accused and maybe hanged for witchcraft a few centuries earlier, but ferocious, and you would not want to argue with a sort of very domineering, very indomitable character who knows her own mind and makes a bit of a living, I dare say, supplements her income by selling talismans and love filters and whatnot to the local population, who hold her in quite a degree of awe and respect. But she has psychic powers as a result of being born and bred near this fissure in time. That's something, again, which echoes through to other future episodes of Doctor Who in the new series, where the same idea is reworked. She is the goody who comes on board as an ally for the Doctor. Not an entirely willing ally, because she's a very suspicious woman who doesn't really trust anyone, doesn't trust outsiders, very traditional country person in that way. But she realises the Doctor is more knowledgeable in what's going on than she is, and so she gets on board. And it transpires that an old folk tradition of chucking salt over your shoulder to ward off evil works, because the Fendahl, or at least the rather snaky Fendaline, if not the female figure herself at the centre of it, are vulnerable to salt. So they go around finding all of the salt and lobbing buckets and barrels and jars of salt at these monsters to ward them off. And the idea of a circle of salt as a protective device from the forces of evil, which has been part of folk magic since the year dot is given credence in the show. And you could also argue the fact that the Fendahlen look rather like kind of sluggy type creatures, and obviously salt is dangerous to slugs. They can't cross it without dying rather horribly in the process. So all kind of layers nicely, one on top of the other. Those of you of a certain age might well recognise Daphne Hurd from her appearance as Mrs. P in To the Manor Born, when he had Peter Bowles playing a nouveau riche supermarket owner, owner of an entire chain of supermarkets, a very, very wealthy man who was paired against Penelope Keith's old money. And Daphne Hurd played his decidedly Central European mother, and was very entertaining. It's a very popular series back when I was young. Still quite popular these days, I think, on reruns and things like that. So there's a lot going on in that. And I should also mention another person who's worthy of note, who played Thea Ransom, Wanda Ventham, who appeared in 2 other episodes of Doctor Who as well over the years, playing different characters, and a whole slew of other programmes too, who eventually went on to become the mother of Benedict Cumberbatch and appeared as his fictional mother, if you see what I mean, as Sherlock Holmes' mother in the Sherlock TV series. So sort of a central figure there in theatrical dynasties and theatrical royalty. She doesn't get too much to get her teeth into in the part of Thea Ransom. Unfortunately, they could have bumped up her lines a bit and given her a more interesting role. But she gives it her all when she's floating around all dressed in gold, trying to look sinister and scary. So that's quite entertaining and engaging. Eventually, needless to say, they do defeat the Fendahl and reduce it back to the level of a singular skull, while using the very technology used to reanimate it in the first place, to then use it to kill it off. I say kill it off, they use it to reduce it in power. And then they take the skull off and say they're going to go and throw it in a star that's about to go supernova, because surely, even a Fendahl cannot survive a supernova. And we don't see it happening, but we're told that's what's going to happen. There have been bits of spin-off fiction books rather than TV episodes in which the Fendahl survives that and comes back and causes more problem later. They've never reused the Fendahl in Doctor Who, which is a shame, I think, because it's such a strong, sinister force that it is worth reusing. Interesting in that the Fendahl is an entirely silent villain. Thea Ransom, when she becomes the woman in gold, doesn't speak at all. She just smiles sinisterly. And the sluggy, snaky things, the Fendahlen, they don't speak. So you never hear anything from the Fendahl. It's just this looming presence of predatory death in the corner, which is relenting and cannot be negotiated with. And maybe the fact that it doesn't speak is part and parcel of its menace. At least if it could speak, you'd have a chance to understand motivation and maybe talk it, rationalise it down, negotiate with the thing. But with a creature that never communicates, it just eats and eats and eats and eats, consumes all the life around it. It's unrelenting. What can you do except either try and kill it or run like hell in the opposite direction? So that may be the silence adds to it in a way that, let's say, a character like Sutekh, who I mentioned in a previous review of the Pyramids of Mars, who's a very talkative villain. His menace is in that deep sepulchral voice, and again his unrelenting love of chaos and death and destruction. But not all villains necessarily need tons of dialogue, and the silence works quite well with this one. Other than that, I think that pretty much covers everything we wanted to say. Except that it's a shame that Ma Tyler, the actress, is dead and Daphne Hurd, so she can't come back. But it's a shame we never got to see her again in anything else, because she was such an entertaining and engaging character. And she fits in with that line of eccentric old women that having spent an awful lot of time with my grandmother growing up, I like these characters of mad old grandmothers. And it sits well with the sort of line of other characters that I've mentioned in previous reviews, like Miss Hawthorne in The Daemons, the White Witch of the Daemons. the artist in the Crinoids, who was not a witch, but again a very eccentric old lady doing battle with the forces of evil and supporting the Doctor. And as I think I said in that review, the Doctor, Tom Baker, rather, the actor of the character, was quite keen to have her on board as a potential companion, which is something that has happened in audiobooks, audio plays, but has never happened on the actual TV show, of having an elderly lady, or for that matter, an elderly man, as a companion. Well, I suppose we've got Worf. Worf is the closest we've ever got to in terms of an elderly companion, although he was a very brief companion, and more of a background character rather than what you'd call a full-on regular companion. But maybe that's something they need to consider, as well as having the glamorous young females and the occasional dashing, brave young man, although that seems to have been replaced by, in New Who, by simpering, drippy blokes. They very rarely go for a strong character, except Captain Jack. The rest of them tend to be very wet and simpery, and they're just there because their girlfriend is the Doctor's companion, and they loiter in the background, moping a lot. Very boring, very repetitive. They need to have much more charismatic characters for companions, and I'd suggest maybe considering having an eccentric old lady as a companion, a grandmotherly figure who can be there doing the full Margaret Rutherford and swinging her handbag at Daleks and giving it all. That would add a whole new dimension and flavour to Doctor Who, if it indeed survives to reach such points in time. But I'll leave that review here and add others later.